Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show. Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode I'm joined by co-host, Phil Lindsey. From the world of comic books comes a series based on one of the most influential and critically acclaimed stories of all time, featuring a cast of characters inspired by the original book, engaged in a race war that threatens to tear down humanity in a reality where costumed adventurers have forever changed the world. We're talking about Watchmen. Watchmen is an HBO series based on the DC Comics book written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Dave Gibbons. The series was created by Damon Lindelof and featured characters from the original story as well as new characters created specifically for the show. Moore's name was left off the project, as was the norm for any property he did not own. This was per his request, as he felt that his comic book work should be kept separate from any theatrical or cinematic adaptations. Set in modern-day Tulsa, the Watchmen series takes place 34 years after the events of the book, which saw millions die in New York thanks to an orchestrated attack from Watchmen member Adrian Veidt. Veidt believed that such an attack would unite the world's superpowers, forcing them to look past their differences as they faced a common threat. That threat came in the form of a giant squid, a creature that was once again replicated during the course of the show to keep the world's leaders focused on cooperation between nations. Costumed adventurers have been outlawed, and a new type of threat is on the rise in the form of the 7th Cavalry, an updated version of the Klan. The cavalry is determined to wreak havoc on the Tulsa police, forcing the officers to hide their faces with masks. The 7th Cavalry takes heavy inspiration from another Watchmen member, Rorschach, who died at the hands of Dr. Manhattan after discovering Veidt's master plan in the first story. Dr. Manhattan becomes a central figure in the show, which focuses primarily on Tulsa officer Angela Abar. Angela is a costume vigilante known as Sister Night, and her friendship with Police Chief Judd Crawford is at the heart of the story. That friendship leads to a bizarre turn of events that carries the plot of the entire series. Many of the book's original characters either appear or are referenced in the series. Laurie Blake, formerly the Silk Spectre, is now an FBI agent sent to investigate the cavalry's actions in Tulsa. Hooded Justice from the Minutemen, a team which preceded the Watchmen, also appears, and the Minutemen themselves appear in flashbacks as well. Adrian Veidt is another central character in the story, as is Lady True, who now owns his company and is plotting to kidnap Dr. Manhattan. The 7th Cavalry has the same plan, and the upper echelon of the group includes powerful politicians who will stop at nothing to see their goals achieved. Watchmen was received with widespread critical acclaim. The show was applauded for its complex characterization and controversial themes that explored the country's racial divide, which is at the core of the story. The series received a number of awards, including a total of 26 Emmy nominations, winning 11. The show had over 7 million viewers in total, making it one of the most watched series in HBO history. Watchmen is considered a phenomenal success by critics and fans who respect the tone and tenor of the show. The storytelling, central themes, and social commentary make it a very timely series and a satisfying continuation of the original book. And that's the lowdown on Watchmen. So there's a handful of books, a handful of stories through the years that I've read as a fan and appreciated, stuff that was attracted to as a teenager, and I would just call them masterworks. These comic book, what they used to call graphic novels, and it's just basically comic books in its highest form. What used to be kids stuff, your typical Batman, Spider-Man, Superman. I mean, the genre evolved in the 80s, as we all know, and it became something more. Thanks to Frank Miller, thanks to Alan Moore, thanks to some other creators out there who saw the medium as something more than just the typical funny books. They wanted to do something new, something different, tell adult stories. And that's where Watchmen comes in. Watchmen is one of those properties, in my opinion, at the time when I first read Watchmen, I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine. I said, well, this is something they can never make into a movie. It's just too big. There's just no way. I mean, it's too complex. It's too broad. And the next thing you know, as the 80s are going through and then you hit the 90s, there's rumors abounding of, well, they're looking at making this into a film. I'm like, what? It's going to be a trilogy. It's going to have to be 3 films. It's going to be so big. and there was different names attached to it. Some of the guys from Monty Python were attached to it at one point or another, and I believe. And there was just the idea of, we got to make this thing big. We got to make it count. We got to make it, to do justice to the original source material. I'm like, well, that's impossible. I don't know how you do that. It's the same idea with Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. I don't care to see that on the big screen, nor do I want to see it, because they will inevitably screw it up. Not because they're trying to, but because the original source material is just so good. And that's how I feel about The Watchmen. And the movie turned me off. Phil, you and I talked about the movie before, off the air, I believe, as well as maybe on a show. And the movie turned me off. I don't hate the film, but, I didn't need Zack Snyder holding up the book next to the scene and yelling action and saying, okay, now you stand here and you do this and we're going to make it look just like the panel. That's a turnoff to me. Like, if you're going to adapt the thing to the movie, adapt it. I don't understand why. I mean, don't change it all, obviously, but adapt it to make it work for the medium that you're translating into. Don't just give me a carbon copy of the book, because if you do that, I'll just keep the book and I don't need the movie. So when you heard about a Watchmen TV series being developed for HBO, especially with Damon Lindelof at the helm, what was your first thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, I was kind of put off because, if you know anything about Alan Moore is like, don't touch this book. Don't do anything else with it. Don't create any more properties. That's not what I want. Right. So I'm all for, creators' rights and whatever creators want their work to be used for. So I was a little put off by that at first, because I was like, you guys keep trying to do sequels to this thing. He told you guys no. But whatever, that's what companies do. So I was a little put off by that, and then I saw the trailer, and it had kind of the same tone as the movie, and I was like, like you said, I didn't hate the movie. I thought the movie was fine, but I was like, if it's like the movie, I don't think I'm gonna end up liking it.
Yeah, I was put off by it too. I was never a fan of Lost. Were you a fan of that show? Did you get into it?
No.
I actually watched the first episode. It's totally not fair, by the way, to the show at all. But I watched the first episode, and when I heard monsters, or I heard about smoke monsters, I said, yeah, I'm out. Because I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but I'm like, there was a lot of intrigue just between the passengers and how are they going to get off this island. It's like, everyone's desperate and they're crashed, and how can they get off? Where are they? And all this stuff. And I thought that was enough of a show, but then it became, it's going to be supernatural. And I'm like, why? I don't understand why that needs to happen. So, I'm not a fan of that stuff, but I was turned off by it for some reason. I was like, I don't really care about this. But the show got tons of praise, and Damon Lindelof was like, oh man, this guy's the next big thing, and he's great, and he's this, he's that. So his name gets attached to Watchmen, and obviously it becomes, oh my God, this is going to be epic. But I crossed my fingers. I hope for the best. I wasn't really, I didn't have a horse in the race either way, really. I just was going to wait and see what happened. So when HBO Max became a thing, I watched it, and I binged Watchmen in a couple, 2-3 days after getting the app. And I watched it again recently. I'm watching the last episode right now. We got a lot to talk about here, right? But I'll say right off the bat that I like the fact that they took it in different directions, because, as you said about Alan Moore, it's totally true. Alan Moore has been so disgusted with the process, not just Watchmen, but League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and other things from hell. I don't think his name is on that either, because Alan Moore's thing is, look, I wrote this to be a comic. It's not a movie. If I wanted a movie, I would have wrote a movie. So his name's not even on this. It's just Dave Gibbons, who's the illustrator. And, good for Dave, but, and dude, I'm like you, I totally respect him for that. I'm a writer. If I was told, hey, Tom, we're going to take your stuff, first of all, wow, show me the money. Let's do this. But if it was a medium that I didn't care about, or I thought, I don't think I want my stuff there. I would flat out say, look, you can't just do this. This is mine. But when you write for one of the big two, Marvel or DC, they own it. At the end of the day, they own it. So, yeah. Creator-owned properties are all the rage and have been since the 90s, but at that time, they weren't really a thing. So, I like the fact that the series took the book in different directions. And I think that may have been the saving grace for this thing. What do you think?
I agree. I didn't watch it when it aired. Um, I think I watched it fairly recent. So like right when the pandemic started and we all got huddled in the house and it turned into we're all in the house more. That's when I binge watched it. And I think what really makes it stand out and kind of be its own thing is that it's not afraid to take risks, and it wasn't afraid to take risks that are kind of in line with things that more believed in.
That's true. I hadn't looked at it that way, but yeah, um, there's worse things to be known for. I mean, like I said, he didn't want his name on this. We all know that. But,
Yeah.
I mean, I would be curious to know what his opinion of it is. I would dare say he's probably not watched an episode. That'd be my guess.
I'm sure he hasn't.
You know?
But I do say that it's in his in the same vein that he created the book in, because the book is created as like a deconstruction of comics. And I feel like the show is kind of a deconstruction of American history in some ways.
That's a good call. And that sort of starts off this episode and gets us, right into the fray of it. I mean, this thing starts off with the massacre in Tulsa, which I'm not sure what the official title of it is. That may be it, but
yeah,
dude,
it's the Black Wall Street massacre. Right?
That's it. That's it. You're right. I got to be honest with you. I didn't know about this. I had no idea the history behind this. Were you aware of this at all?
Well, I am. So when it started, I was looking like no, and then I saw like the Tulsa, and I was like, they're really doing like the Black Wall Street murders, and I mean,
Wow.
it's such an obscure piece of Black history. Like a lot of people that I know, of course, didn't know about it. But it's one of those things where if you do know about it, it's mostly like me, like other Black people and people that are huge history buffs. So it just to start the show off with that already set the tone for the kind of show that we're gonna get, because like I said, it's such an obscure piece of history.
Yeah, obscure is the right word, man, because I was talking about this with my wife a couple of days ago, and I was telling her about this scene. She didn't watch the show with me. She wasn't really into it. But I told her about this scene, and she didn't have any clue what I was talking about. I'm like, yeah, I didn't know about it either. And it frustrates me because, American history should be American history, and that's what you should be taught. Not the soapbox, but, I didn't learn this in school. I should have. A lot of stuff I didn't learn in school. It's ridiculous. I mean, don't just talk to me about flag waving, salute, God bless America, apple pie, and all that crap. I mean, give me the bad stuff too. It's part of what this country was. So why not just tell me? I mean, it just frustrates me that I never knew about this. And I don't know that I did know until after watching the episode. And it seems like I heard it on a podcast, it may have been Mark Bernard on Kevin Smith's podcast that was talking about it. I'm like, wait a minute, this is real? So then I immediately went online and started looking it up. It's like, holy God, it is real. And, it's kind of a weird story, everything that happened, but man, to see it portrayed like that and the fear that those people must have gone through. I mean, getting shot, murdered in cold blood in the streets. I mean, my God, this happened in this country. This is not some civil war in Beirut. This is right here on our streets. I mean, that's frightening, man.
It's not, this is not that old. I think that's the thing people forget with a lot of civil rights movement and some of this stuff is this isn't this old. I think the Black Wall Street massacres were like 1921.
21, yeah.
So that's not that long ago. That's
99 years.
Yeah, that's not that
Right.
long ago. It's
No,
within
it's
100
not.
years. So I mean, there's a lot of things that I think of with that when I first heard about the story of the Black Wall Street massacre. I mean, that's a whole conversation in itself, but it's so relevant in the sense that this was a community of Black people that were off on their own and they were trying to better themselves. This wasn't, they were trying to isolate in some way to, to use another comic reference. This wasn't like some kind of Asteroid M thing where they were trying to come together and put together this big, warship to come and murder a bunch of people. These were people that wanted to live in peace. They wanted to better themselves, and they had a great thing going there. I mean, there's so many things that once I learned about what was actually going on in that city and why it was so revered by the people that lived there, it makes it even more of a tragedy.
Yeah, man, and seeing the people just run for their lives, and of course, this opening scene is based in history, obviously, but they have to tie it to the story, so we don't really know in the beginning of this what all this means, and then we come to find out. Of course, I think one thing that this show does extremely well is it does that M. Night Shyamalan bit where, like, you don't know what one scene means, but 20 minutes from now they're going to tie it back, and you're like, oh, that's what it means. So, you know, in that way, it's a very intriguing concept for a series. And I mean, like I said, it pieces everything together, and it's just like a huge jigsaw puzzle. And you have to be patient. It's only 9 episodes here, folks, but you got to be patient because, you know, stuff that you see in episode 1 is stuff that you see in episode 9, and it all just ties in. It makes sense. Like, good luck sitting down and trying to tell anyone about this show in like 30 minutes. There's no way, because it's just too textured. It's too layered. There's just too much stuff going on from start to finish, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I just think the way that they weaved everything together, and I think the way that they reintroduced every character that remained from the original Watchmen series in an interesting way, and then tied it back to like the history and backstories of like the Minutemen was really interesting.
Which is something that they didn't explore too much in the film, and the book
Yeah.
only slightly touches on it. The only thing you know about the Minutemen is you know who the characters are, and you know that that the comedian did what he did, and you know, especially for a comic book at the time, you know, sexual assault was it's not something that exactly happened all the time. I mean, that was Alan Moore was fearless, as he always has been, but you know, sexually assaulting Sally Jupiter, and we get the end result, which is Laurie, and thus is born the Watchman in the actual book. But all that plays into effect here. We've got Laurie in the show, and let's talk about some of these characters, man, because you can't really talk about this show without talking about the primary character, Regina King as Angela Abar. I've always liked this actress. I don't know if I saw her doing something like this, if I'm being honest, not for any other reason, but because she doesn't look like, I don't want to say tall, but tall. And do you see where I don't know. Like if you told me she was going to be a superhero, I'd be like, okay, I don't know. Petite maybe is the word. Short, petite, I don't know. And that's not being fair at all, I know. But when I first heard she was the lead, I'm like, okay, well, let's see what happens. But oh my God, she's in that costume for 5 minutes, and I'm like, okay, I'm sold. This is awesome. She looks freaking great. So,
Yeah, I think she's fantastic. I think she carries the show a lot. I mean, this is a fantastic cast regardless. But I think she was just great as a lead character. I mean, in the stuff outside of the costume, she's really good, and I think in costume she's really great as well. All the stunts and stuff look really good. Yeah, and I just think her character and just how they tied it back to Minutemen is fantastic as well.
yeah, through her grandfather, through Will, and who's Louis Gossett Jr. And I love Louis Gossett Jr. He's always been one of my favorites, and he is perfect in this role. And I mean, very well said. It's a great cast, no matter how you look at it. I don't know if this thing had any option but to succeed. I mean, I'm glad it didn't tank. I mean, obviously, but you know, there's some smart actors in this show. You have to know that the minute they read the script, if it had been anything other than, oh, this is nice, we can do something with this. I mean, you would have to think no one would have said yes. I mean, if it had been hokey or, you know, silly or asinine or juvenile, would have been, I think I'll pass. But, you know, they got the best of the best for this show, and man, the quality of the acting in this show is exemplary. And, yeah, I think Regina King does a fantastic job. Don Johnson is Judd Crawford, chief of the Tulsa Police, and turns out he's Here's where I get fuzzy. We'll come back to Regina King at some point here. Where I get fuzzy on the whole Don Johnson thing with Judd Crawford is they never really tell us. Like, I kept thinking, okay, is he the son of one of the cops that assaulted Will? Is he who's he linked to? And dude, if there's a backstory, I've missed it. It's went completely over my head. It's just that he was a member of the 7th Cavalry, and they got close to the A-Bars for a reason, because they knew about Dr. Manhattan, and we didn't know about any of that, of course, till the very last episode. But did you see this coming with Crawford in the show, like where he was going to be this, I don't know, this racist and a Klan? I mean, I like I said, dude, I'm still fuzzy as to what he is. Do you know what this guy was supposed to have been?
Well, if I remember correctly, I think he's he was a descendant of somebody that was a Klansman, or whatever, the 5th Cavalry, right?
7th Cavalry is what
7th Cavalry,
is what exists now, and he had the Klan robe in his house, which he said was his grandfather's.
Right, so he's a descendant of a Klansman, and
yeah,
from my understanding, the 7th Cavalry is kind of like a newer version of the Klan, if you want to call it that.
Right.
And that's kind of how I read it. Now, there's a lot of interesting tones to Don Johnson's character that I didn't understand until I watched it fully, because the first episode is just so many things thrown at you at once. It's like, wait.
Right.
Like, this guy is saying he's her dad, then all of a sudden he's a Klansman, then like wait. So it's a lot thrown at you at once. But when you tie it to the Black Wall Street murders and where her history really comes from, and the fact that Judd Crawford is like this. He's supposed to be the good guy, right? Like, if you would think of any other show, he's the good guy. He's a doting dad. He's the kind of white savior character that you see in movies like, I don't know, like you've seen this character before. And that's why I think it's so interesting that they subverted this character in the first episode and go immediately like, nope, this guy's not a good guy.
Yeah, and he does it, like you said, he's that doting father figure, and everybody loves him, and he's the life of the party. He takes a hit of cocaine, and I'm like, where'd that come from, man? Like, yeah, you knew when that happened. Okay, this is not what we thought. He's not who we thought. I mean, there's something more going on here. And then, of course, he gets killed, which I didn't see coming at all. And when this show was like red hot and currently going, I was aware of it on social media, but I didn't really read any tweets or anything, and I wasn't really interested in watching it. But then when I call on HBO Max, I was very new to everything, so I didn't have any spoilers. I didn't have anything, sort of clouding my vision going into it. So his death at the end of the first episode was like, okay, that's different. I didn't see that coming at all. So, yeah, Crawford, the chief of the Tulsa police in this show, and I mean, very like a father figure to Angela. They're very tight. We find out about what they called the White Knight, right?
Yes.
And where these cops were killed. Little did we know that his group was behind the whole thing. And
yeah.
My God, I mean, innocent cops slaughtered in their homes. And that's how Angela ended up with all 3 kids that she has.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to go back to how relevant it is, I think it's just to point out, like, we're in this narrative right now with police brutality in this country, and I think it's just such an interesting way to position this character that's a police officer and go like, look, no, there's history behind this man who's at the head of the police in Tulsa, not just like one police officer that's just like has like a random desk job. Like, he is the chief.
Right.
So everything comes from him down. And I think it was just such an interesting idea to paint him as this guy. And I mean, depending on what your mileage is with this, I'm sure some people took offense to it, but just like we were talking about earlier with, Black Wall Street murders, and how a lot of people don't know the history. I don't think a lot of people know some of the history behind the police in some of these cities, especially rural cities like Tulsa.
Mm.
It's it's some layers behind there that we don't know, and I think to, like I said earlier, deconstruct American history in that way at this time was just so. It was just such a good way to go with it, and especially having a black lead for this show.
It fits the tone, and having a black lead for the show is very much in tune with what the show wanted to do and what it was supposed to be, and I think it was perfect fit. And it's one of those shows that just, I don't know, it kind of slaps you a little bit and says, okay, you have to deal with this. Here's your lead, and not only is it a black person, it's a female also. Which, again, how often does that happen? Not enough, obviously. So, yeah, in that way, I think it does very much reflect what's going on in the world today. And it gives you sort of a very extreme example or very extreme take on the situation, like you said, that we're in the world today. I mean, it's, the whole thing about the Klan, in and of itself seems to be old-fashioned and a Southern thing. Dude, I'm in North Carolina, and I personally have never seen a Klan march. I've heard about them. I don't know that they've been in the same town that I'm in, maybe occasionally, but I've never had the desire to go and even protest it, because my thought's always been, I don't want to see that. I don't want it. Like, I know it's real, but God, man, I don't know. I feel like I don't know if I could stand there and not bum rush someone. I mean, because, I'd probably get killed, but, just rage, just anger, just, God, look at these clowns marching. I mean, it's startling to me how little we've learned as a culture, how little we've learned as a race in the short time we've been here. I mean, I don't know. I think this shows a direct reflection of the characters and whatnot. I mean, Judd Crawford should love Angela. They've been close for a while, and again, it turns out the whole thing's a scheme to get Dr. Manhattan, which is all kinds of messed up, because we see later why they wanted to get him to begin with. But lies being told, things not as they seem. That's this entire show, man. I mean, just when you think you've got something figured out, they throw something else at you. A good example of that is Wade Tillman, portrayed by Tim Blake Nelson, which I never knew his name, but once you see his face, you're like, oh, I've seen that guy in stuff before. Dude,
Yeah.
I think he stole this show every time he was on camera, man. I love this guy.
Yeah. I really like the idea of the Looking Glass character, because he's kind of like a newer version of what Rorschach was. And he's just such an interesting character. I mean, just his whole backstory is interesting. And I think Nelson did a great job just throughout. When you first see him, it's kind of like, okay, what's going on here? Like the whole reflective mask thing, and even the whole concept of his mask is interesting. He wears it's like an aluminum mask, but it's to keep psychic threats out, right?
Yeah, from the squid.
Right.
Yeah. Which apparently that's what they're telling you, is that's what killed everyone. It wasn't the squid. Physically falling on the city, sure. But it was the psychic shockwaves that sent out, and like people just dropped dead. So he's got because he was in New York the night it happened in 1985. So he's got a true terror, like a legit fear of this thing happening again. So he's been covering his face in this material, which keeps out those psychic waves, I guess, as they referred to it. But yeah, I'm like you, man. He's an updated version of Rorschach, just not as brutal, I guess. But at first I thought, oh, I'm not gonna like this guy. You hear the voice, you're like, oh, he's a good old boy. I know what that means. He's gonna be, he might be a bad guy. I mean, it's just, and he's working with black cops. This is not gonna end well. But wow. Dude, I was totally wrong about this guy in the end.
Yeah, but see, that's why I said they did such a good job of subverting white characters in this show. I mean, they take Judd's character and he's supposed to be what is the stereotypical good guy. And you look at a guy like Wade Tillman and think, "Oh, this guy's up to something. He's always brooding alone in his house, you know. This guy's got a Unabomber written all over him."
Oh my God, totally. Yeah.
So but he ends up being the more straightforward and the straight-laced guy of the show.
Yeah, his dialogue must have been awesome to read because his dialogue is great. I mean, never a wasted word with this guy. He's very matter of fact, very straight to the point, and got that country vibe thing happening, but he's like very personable, but he's standoffish at the same time. It's an odd mix. And he doesn't let anybody in. And for obvious reasons, we see what happens to him. He gets close to him, he's left, and the squid drops, and then, chaos ensues. But yeah, he's got a real fear of this thing happening again. And he's one of the, I was going to say heroes, but I don't know if I'd call him that. This show is different than the book and the movie, obviously, because there's costume adventurers is the term that Captain Metropolis used in the show, right? There's not many costume adventurers running around because at this point it's illegal. You can't do that.
Yes.
So anyone tuning into this expecting to see capes and whatnot, I mean, you do get a glimpse of some stuff, but it's not like, here's the Justice League. It's not like that. So, yeah, it's basically just regular dudes standing around, like the Red Scare, which I love that guy. I'm not even sure why. I just thought he was hilarious. Yeah. But we never saw him without the mask. We just knew he was Russian, and he did what he was told, and he hung out with Pirate Jenny, right? Which was an odd pairing. And through the midst of this, we get Laurie Blake, which is a throwback to the original book. Obviously, as we said before, she is Sally Jupiter's daughter, the product of the comedian's sexual assault in the book. And she mentions that a couple of times about her folks. And she's taken the name Laurie Blake, which is, that works. But man, Jean Smart is just freaking great in this show. I cannot believe, I say that like, oh, I thought she was a bad actress. I just cannot believe how freaking great she was in this, man. I mean, just looking at her in one scene, you're like, this is an ex-hero who's heard all the crap, who's seen all the nonsense. She's been there. She's done that. She doesn't care now. Dude, she's phenomenal in this show.
Yeah, she's great. I just really like the direction they went with Laurie afterwards. Just having her as this like bitter, jaded character. And I mean, like the first episode we see her in, I think that's episode 1, right? Or is it episode 2?
Episode 2, I think.
Yeah, you're right. It's the opening of episode 2 when she stops the vigilante who's trying to stop the quote-unquote bank robbery.
Yes, that was a not so subtle jab at Batman, I believe.
Right. And I mean, just the whole setup of how they caught the vigilante, just how just relentless she was with him. It was just like, nope, let's throw this guy in jail. Let's just immediately shoot him.
Oh yeah, right. And she's so smart. That's something else. There's some incredibly smart people in this show, and just frightening how smart some of these people are. I mean, obviously Ozymandias, we'll get to that. But Laurie, in and of herself, that character, she is incredibly smart. She knows about Angela from the first second she lays eyes on her. And you're like, man, how much does she already know? Because you can just tell when she speaks to her. You can just tell she already knows something. But she's got a wicked, dry sense of humor. And we see that because I mentioned Red Scare and Pirate Jenny. She comes up and she tells them she's FBI. And she asks who they are. They tell them their code names. And she's like, cool. That's just the funniest thing, the way she says it. Like that's cool. And then she calls Looking Glass Mirror Guy the whole show.
Mirror guy, yeah.
Even in the last episode, she's tied to that chair, and he comes up. He's got a Rorschach mask. He's like, "Don't look at me," and she's like, "Mirror guy." He's like, it's Looking Glass. It's so good.
Yeah, but I just think all of that stuff and just making all of her quirks closer to the comedians in this is just such a fantastic idea. And it's just something you would never think of. And I didn't even notice it until like 5 episodes in. It's like, well, of course, she's not taking anything seriously because she's acting like the comedian. Like everything has this dry humor to it, like you said. And then it's also very cynical and very nihilistic as well.
And till you said that, until you brought that up, I don't know that I hadn't even pieced that together because she just hated him so much. But no, you're right. She's totally like him. She's mannered like him as well, where everything's a joke. Nothing's serious. This is all crap. We're all going to hell. That's how she feels. Like, but one thing we find out pretty early with this character is that she still loves Dr. Manhattan. That's for sure.
Yes.
There's even a scene where she's in a hotel, and if you've seen the episode, and when I first saw it, because it goes by very fast, and I'm like, wait a minute, wait, what? So I rewound, to look, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So yeah, I didn't see that coming at all. So yeah, it's obvious that she's still in love with him. And we see her in one of the booths where she's talking to him because everyone thinks he's still on Mars. And as we find out in the course of the show, obviously he's not on Mars. He's on Earth, and he's been with Angela. And that brings us to Dr. Manhattan himself. And I don't want to mispronounce his name. Yahya Abdul Mateen II. And hopefully is it Yahya or Yaha?
I'm not sure. I don't want to mispronounce it either.
Right? Yahya. I assume it's Yahya, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, but great actor.
Oh my
fantastic
God.
in Aquaman.
Yes.
I can't say enough good things about how well he portrayed his character Cal, and then you find out he's Dr. Manhattan later, and he's just great in both roles. Again, it's just so many subvert things that they do with this show that are so smart. I mean, making the most powerful being in the world disguised as a black man is a very ballsy decision. And it's just so smart when you really sit and think about everything that's going on in this show, and it's about corrupt police officers. It's great.
Yeah, very well put. And it's, again, the lead is a black female, and she's a cop, and she's an adventurer. And then, like you said, the most powerful being in the known universe, Dr. Manhattan, is also hiding himself as a black man on Earth. Yeah, none of this is by accident at all. I mean, this is a lot of social commentary going on here, and I'm all for it. I think it's cool. And I like that none of this is expected, that you didn't expect this to happen. I found it interesting when Angela first meets Dr. Manhattan in Vietnam, which, by the way, is the 51st state in the Union, which is very odd, but, they make it fit, they make it work, and it looks fine. But you never see his face. So you never see Dr. Manhattan as Dr. Manhattan. You only see him later when he assumes Cal's features. And dude, if there's a reason for this, I don't know what it is, and maybe but I would assume there has to be a reason why they didn't shoot his face. And I've not, sort of dove into the show deep enough to actually get an answer. But what do you think the reason for that is?
Well, my guess is because this is like a loose sequel to the movie. So my guess is we're supposed to believe that he took on Cal's features later as Dr. Manhattan, but before he still looks like Jonathan Osterman. Mm-hmm. And I suppose that's their workaround of not having him look like Cal until he makes that shift. That's just a guess, though.
That's what I thought, too. And I was like, well, I don't know. Lori doesn't look like the actress that played Silk Spectre in the first movie. And I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of it's something to research and look into. But yeah, I'm with you. He's fantastic in this, and the perfect guy for this. Soft spoken, calm, reserved, everything Dr. Manhattan should be, and then some. I mean, this guy is pitch perfect. And I love how they explained everything. When you get to episode 8, and we're skipping around like crazy, right? But when you get to episode 8 and you realize that Cal is Dr. Manhattan, I mean, did you have any inkling, any idea at all that that was going to be the case?
No. When I first got the twist, and I managed to not get spoiled on it. So when it first happened, I was like, wait, what? And I mean, when you really think back on it, there's so many little hints that they put out there that, yeah, of course. Well, they put this here, they put this there, but it just was never enough where it was like, well, he's Dr. Manhattan. Because I mean, just going into it, I didn't think we would see Dr. Manhattan. I thought we were going to see all new characters for most of the show. I didn't think we were going to see most of the old cast. So I was surprised in itself when we first saw Laurie. And I mean, when we get some of the other characters later too, I was surprised.
And you know, I'm with you. I didn't have any spoilers. I didn't have any sort of preconceived notions or warnings going into this at all. So when I first saw Laurie, I didn't even honestly know it was her, because I don't know how long it takes her to actually introduce herself. But I just thought, okay, here's a new character. Because I wasn't really, I was with you, man. I felt like they were moving forward with the story and introducing brand new characters. And I didn't know they were going to do this. So yeah, it makes sense. It pieces everything together. It puts everything, links everything directly to the book, which I think is smart. But yeah, these characters appearing together. I mean, when she sees Dr. Manhattan transported into that cage at the end, you can just see she loses her breath. Again, she's obviously still in love with this guy, even though he is basically incapable of it. I mean, the Dr. Manhattan character, I don't know if there's ever been a character this complex and this intriguing since Alan Moore wrote him. And maybe there has been, it just hasn't received life on TV or in a movie. But the fact that this guy can be everywhere at one time, and his concept of time is relative and it's different, and it's, you know, he can be here talking to you now but still be in 1955, and it's messed up. And I thought that the sort of the time jumping back and forth in this show, if done incorrectly, will make you want to pull your hair out. Right? But I thought they handled it pretty well with the flashbacks and jumping back and forth through time through this with him.
Yeah. I thought the episode where we kind of find out why he hid himself and everything was written really, really well. I think it was executed really well around the story that we're told. It doesn't feel like it's out of place. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think if you miss one note somewhere, if you just have to step away from the TV for a second and you miss something, you're like, okay, what's going on?
Yeah, the whole thing falls apart. It's a house of cards when it comes to storytelling like this, because if you do miss a beat, then you're going to lose the audience, and that's the last thing you want to do. But yeah, he, like I said, I can't say enough good things about him, and Dr. Manhattan is at the core of this show. Without this character, there's no Watchmen series. It just doesn't exist. You can't say that about the book, but he is the central figure to this show. Without him, there's no plot, there's no Angela, there's no nothing. And they're all centered on killing him and taking his power, which again, we don't find out till, you know, episode 8, 9, I think it took that long for them to get to the point, which is, you know, it's a heck of a long time to wait, but the timing of it seemed fine to me. You can't talk about this cast without rounding out the big ones, and that's Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias himself, Jeremy Irons, who could basically do anything and get an Oscar because he's that good. And you could put him on a Cheetos commercial, that thing's going to get critical acclaim. I don't know if I would have picked him to play Ozymandias, but after seeing him do it, I mean, I forgot all about the other guy in the movie, because now he's Adrian Veidt to me. He's perfect.
God, now that you mention it, I don't remember who plays Veidt in the movie.
I don't know that I knew the actor. Honestly, I don't know that I I don't know that I did.
Hold on, let me do some Google foo so that I don't sound crazy here. Uh, Matthew Good.
That's
I
it. I
Matthew
knew
Good.
that.
Um, so yeah, but I mean he's picture perfect as White when they show him in the comic version of his costume with
Oh yeah.
the headband and everything. He looks perfect. I mean, he
Yes.
looks exactly like the character. Um,
Comics accurate costume for a change, kids. I love it.
yeah, and I mean this costume looks way better than the movie costume. It looks so much better. We don't need we don't need Vite to be in all black. That just doesn't make sense for who Vite is.
No.
It just reveals that he's the bad guy. But don't get me jumping into, what I didn't like about the movie. It just having him in this leather black outfit screams I'm the bad guy to me. And that's the direct opposite of what he was in the book. You're not supposed to know that he was the bad guy.
Very true. And, it's the old line from Batman, right? The villain considers himself a hero, right? You live long enough to see yourself become the villain. I mean, it's the same thing. Most villains don't think they're villains. It's the same thing in comic books and pro wrestling. The best heel doesn't know he's a heel. He honestly thinks he's doing the right thing. It's the same thing with comic book villains. The best ones, and Adrian Veidt one of them. I don't think he would profess to be perfect, but he knows what he's up to. He knows he has an agenda pretty much for everything. But I don't think that he would say that any of his agendas or any of his plans have ever been despicable. Like, he truly wanted to save the world. And he thought that by slaughtering 3 million innocent or not so innocent people, that he could just do that and make everything good and fix everything. And turns out, you see through the course of the show that really it didn't fix anything. I mean, is there world peace? Yeah. I mean, there's not really much talk of the world superpowers blowing each other up, but he's keeping everyone under control by dropping the baby squids and on random cities, random countries, whenever he wants to. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. That took a while to figure out what was going on too, because as we know, this show's based on the book, not the film, which changed Ozymandias' plan.
Yeah, so the rainy squid, when we first see it, it's just like, what? And so then once you get of course he would be smart enough to keep his plan going. It wasn't just a one time have the squid appear. He had to keep up the charade. And so I think the way that they did that is just incredibly well thought out. Just having someone that's as smart as White know, nope, I'm obsessive enough that I know I have to keep this going. I have to keep doing this. And even with when you get to the end of the book, you know that Rorschach's journal was taken to a newspaper, and understanding what became of it, and what people, it still wasn't enough to move people. And again, that was something else that I thought was very relevant. To jump around again, I'm all over the place. Yeah. But I thought that was extremely relevant today, is knowing that the truth is out there, and it's a journalist somewhere put this news out there, and people still didn't believe it. And if that's not relevant, I don't know what is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, written in the guy's own hand, stained with his own blood, more than likely, from his own personal viewpoint. And they take it and completely change it, and it becomes, it gets picked up by a bunch of racists who want to slaughter anyone that doesn't look like them. That wasn't Rorschach at all. He never, that I can recall, Rorschach was twisted and he was screwed up and he was all kinds of damaged, but I don't recall him ever, oh, well, let's go kill some black guys. That's not who he was. He was, but again, as you said, stuff falls in the wrong hands. It gets misinterpreted. people want things to say what they want them to say. So if
Absolutely.
they want to believe a certain way, that's what the thing says to them. And it's a shame, but that's how it is, right?
Right. And I think even just the idea behind people getting this text and taking it and going, "Oh, this is justification for who I am." It's so meta in the sense that there were so many Watchmen fans that believed that Rorschach is the hero of the book, and they took this text to go, "Oh, I'm Rorschach because I'm rigid like him." No, and like there's plenty of Alan Moore quotes out there where he says like people came up to him in the street and say, "Oh, I appreciate you for writing Rorschach because he's this character that I feel represents me," and he's like, "No, that's not who Rorschach is." And I think
Right.
a lot of people still misinterpret Rorschach to this day. And so to put that in the show is incredibly smart. And that just tells you that there was a lot of care into looking at what the source material was and the effect that it had on the world.
Yeah, and the thing about the Watchmen story, which makes it so amazing, is that it's a book about superheroes, but in the end, there's no heroes. No one really did the right thing. I mean, you could argue that Dr. Manhattan never should have covered up what Adrian Veidt did. I mean, he was accessory after the fact, in my opinion, and that's how I felt when I read it. And, he uses stone cold logic for everything he does, like, Dr. Spock would. But, at the end of the day, like I said, he's accessory after the fact. And no one really saves the day in that book. I mean, no one really does, which is, not your typical comic book fare, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that's why some people want to connect with Rorschach, because Rorschach is the closest to an endearing character in the book, because he's the only one that is rigid in his beliefs, and he's rigid in, no, we have to do the right thing. But at the same time, he's too rigid and obsessive in a way that is abnormal, and that's that's Alan Moore's critique on just vigilantism and the way Batman is written in comics. It's like, no, this is nobody that is this rigid is normal. Like, they have to be kind of bonkers.
Oh my God, yeah. Can you imagine how screwed up Bruce Wayne would be if he were a real person?
Yeah.
I mean, you would know from a mile away that there's something wrong with him. That whole idea of, he's going to play the party animal and smile with the ladies and stuff. Come on. I mean, would that really even work at that point? Because you would know just by being around him for 5 minutes, there's something weird about that guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Rorschach, like you said, he's committed. He was committed. Like, the character's dead in this show, right? But Rorschach was, trying to document who this character was and to diagnose everything that was wrong with him. There's a lot of stuff wrong with him. Obsessive, compulsive, committed, never took his mask off in front of the Watchmen ever. And he lived this alter ego, thought he could save the world, or, but at the same time believed the world was going to hell, that it was all a waste of time. People were terrible and evil, and they weren't worth saving. Which, the 7th Cavalry repeats his words in this show, which I found pretty fitting, but also weird because, like I said, it's not who he was. But, they just took what they wanted from those diaries and made it, and just sort of retrofit it to fit and make it work for what their agenda was, which is all kinds of messed up. I mean, there's a lot of damaged people in this show. And this show, much like the movie, there's no real savior at the end. It's just, even Angela, who is the heroine of the story, is not perfect. She's made all kinds of mistakes. And, I think she's just lucky to be one of the last people standing at the end of this, because it could have went either way. The whole thing could have fell apart. But, yeah, there's no real good guys in this show, which is, I don't know. Dude, I'm a sucker for good guy versus bad guy. And you hear that stuff in pro wrestling about, oh, he's not a heel, he's not a face, he's a tweener. Shut up. It's there's a reason why those characters don't last longer than 5 minutes in the business, because they don't get over. Because people want to cheer and they want to boo. That's what people are. And I'm a sucker for that stuff. So when you throw me a story that doesn't have a clear villain or a clear hero, everyone's got their own motives. It's not that I won't be into it, but it's not as fulfilling for me in the end, because I love to see the bad guy get his in the end. So,
yeah. So I I think there's a way to write complex characters, and there's a way to write complex characters that are a vehicle to tell a story. And I think that's what Alan Moore does so well in the original novel. And I'm with you. I think sometimes we really want someone to root for, and I think it's why, a lot of us like mob movies so much, because we all want to root for somebody in the movie, and we all want to root for, like, oh, this guy's he's the main character, so we should root for him. But sometimes there's no there's no good guy in the story, and I've had that conversation with some people around, like, a good example is Sopranos.
mm-hmm.
I had a conversation with somebody recently about Sopranos, and, like, I kept saying, like, there's no good guy in Sopranos, like, and he was like, yes, there is. I was like, no, they're all bad people.
Every one of them. Every one of them are horrible people. Yes. Yeah. The kids, the mobsters, the mailman, the dog catcher, they're all horrible people in that show. Like, no redeeming qualities whatsoever. I mean, you can make the same claim for some of the Watchmen stuff, man. Like, Captain Metropolis, when he first visits Will in his home, you're like, okay, this is different. It's a really white guy walking into this black cop's house, and you're like, oh crap. Then you realize it's him because he tells him his name. You're like, if you're a fan of the book, you're like, that's Captain Metropolis. Okay, I get it. And I mean, they have a fling. They have feelings for each other. The thing gets pretty intense pretty quick. He introduces Hooded Justice into the Minutemen, and it becomes, all right, this feeling pretty good. And then they cut him off at the knees, man. Hooded Justice is uncovering this plot by the Klan, and he's all about stopping it. The whole Cyclops thing is going on. And they cut him off and basically said, it's your people's problem, not ours. And I'm like, dude, like, you formed this team, you brought him in, you sang his praises and said he was the first hooded vigilante, the first mass vigilante. You guys owe it all to him. And then, because he's black, it has to be, well, we can't concern ourselves with that. I'm like, okay. So even that guy turned out to be a heel in the end,
Yeah, but again, that's why I say there's so many interesting things they decided to do with the show. And we don't know that much about Hooded Justice from the book. I mean, we get, like, some backstory on him in the novel. We get a little bit of backstory in the Before the Watchmen series about the Minutemen. We get some things about him. Like, we know that he's homosexual. We know some bits and pieces about his character. But I thought to just take this guy that we don't know that much about and make him a black man, and again deconstruct American history in a way of course he's a black guy that did something that nobody knows about, but history wrote it as a white man, because that's kind of what American history does with a lot of things like this. And just everything about it, just Captain Metropolis making him keep his mask on all the time and never being able to show himself.
Right.
I mean, just his whole backstory and where he comes from, coming from Tulsa and experiencing the Black Wall Street massacres, and then going and being a police officer, and everything else that happened in his life, up to being Hooded Justice, is just such a fantastic story. I mean, just the way that I don't want to say it in a cynical way and almost like there's no justice for a black man, but just the way that they present it in itself, like, here's this guy that was doing good, and it's just like, nope, we still won't give him what he deserves either. And he's on the force. He's with us. It's like his peers on the force didn't believe him, and then you join vigilantes who are supposed to do what's right outside of force, and even they don't want to help him with this issue that affects him. It's so interestingly written, and like I said, it's so relevant.
It is, and the scene where his fellow cops attack him and string him up, and you're like, God, this character story is going to end quick, and then they cut him down, and they warn him, and we see him in the street. And he's got essentially the Hooded Justice costume already. He's got the noose around his neck, which has been cut so he could, where they cut him down from the tree and all that crap. And he's got the hood on. And there's a white man and woman getting attacked in an alley. And I didn't think much about it the first time I watched the show, but the second time I thought, isn't it odd that he dove into that alley to save two white people? Now, you could make the argument and say, well, he just really wanted to punch something because of what just happened. His adrenaline was pumping, and he wanted to wreak some havoc and cause some damage. But it's two white people. He could have just as easily said, "It's their problem. Look what just happened to me. I don't care what happens to these two." But dude, he dove in head first, and I'm like, if there is a hero in this story at all, even though this guy's not perfect either, I mean, he may be as close of a hero as you can find. I mean, does he murder people later? Yeah, he does. But, there's always a story to this stuff, right? So when he dove into that alley to save those two, I was like, wow, this guy is, I don't know, he's basically trying to do the right thing, I guess.
Well, that's what makes him such an interesting character to me. I think when we first see him, and we don't know who he is yet, he's watching the Westerns, and You see throughout this thing that's where he kind of gets his sense of justice from, the Westerns and the sheriff and, standing up for what's right. And he does that a few times in the show, but then you also see like, oh, he's kind of like warped and messed up in ways too. But I mean, there's so many cool things. Like there's so many nods to the Minutemen that I wouldn't have even thought of. Like just the idea that he wears a noose around his neck as a costume, and you never think that's tied to, oh, of course it's tied to lynching because that's the time he was in, and like it's just such a smart decision. I mean, it's just so well thought out that I would have never thought to do that.
It's perfect. It explains everything, and like we said before, man, the guys behind this show, Lindelof. I mean, primarily, I'm sure, like, let's tie everything together. Make everything mean something. Like, if you're going to put it in the show, make it mean something. Don't just put it there for a giggle or for an Easter egg. Put it in there to mean something, which is exactly what they did. And they did it through the entire show. One of the things about this that kind of struck me, and I'll get your take on it, the tech in this show is odd because it takes a couple of scenes to realize it, but you kind of notice that everyone's driving an electric car. Like there's no, I don't recall hearing an engine in this show. Like all the cars seem to be electric. But then there's people still using pagers and beepers, which I thought was odd also. I don't know how many characters I saw with like smartphones in their hands. So even though this is like set now, the tech in the show is kind of a mix of, where it could be, where it is. I mean, did you pick up on any of that stuff?
Yeah, I did think some of the stuff that is kind of imagined into what you would think the world would be like in 2019, and it's some of it is weird. It doesn't really hold up, and some of it's kind of like, oh, that's kind of an interesting idea. Like because it's an idea of. At least my interpretation of it is it's an idea of what they thought 2019 would look like in 80s.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess you could also make the argument that of the 3 million people wiped out in 85, how many of those people were going to invent the internet or going to invent, you know what I mean? Or their kids were or whatever. And now they're all gone. So, if you really wanted to I guess, get crazy technical about it, you could. Something else they're doing is like using mini discs as part of their tech, which I found interesting. I remember when the mini disc came out, it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I was like, wait a minute, you could do on here what you do on a CD? That's so cool. And I legit had no idea it was going to get better from there. So, yeah. But, yeah, they seem to be at an odd standstill. And, the smartest guy in the world or in the universe at that point is gone. And they use the word abandoned a couple of times in this show. Like, yeah, he left us behind. He didn't care about us. He split. He took off. He was above this. He hasn't helped. People are praying to him and talking to him. It's really weird. But, sometimes in my head I try to put stuff in the real world. Like whenever I see a Marvel film or whatever, and I think that those guys have found the formula to making it feel like the real world, but also being fantastic at the same time. But if I try to imagine like Superman in the real world, he would totally be not the best guy ever because of the conditions, because of the environment, because of what people would expect from him. And at some point, I think he would just say, all right, screw this, I'm done. He'd just split, which I think is what Dr. Manhattan does. He just, I tried fixing everybody's problems in Vietnam and didn't work out, so I'm out of here. So, he's happier by himself until he gets lonely, I guess. So, yeah, it's I don't know. Like I said, if he were real, that's what I would imagine he would be. He would just be alone, isolated, wouldn't want anything to do with us because he sees us for what we are, flawed individuals. And I don't know. And the way he talks to Angela, you can kind of hear he sounds very human. He sounds very down to earth. He sounds very relatable. But then in the moments when he is himself, you're like, wow, this guy could not be farther from what we are, which is a very interesting dynamic to me.
Yeah. I think that's the paradox of the Dr. Manhattan character, in that he's a very personable person when it comes to like intimate relationships, but everything outside of that, he kind of looks at it in a very like harsh and like very like logical sense that no human would actually look at things.
Because he can see everything. He already knows, right? And it's funny because he there's a block of time that he can't see with Angela. And he just knows that at some point something really bad's going to happen. And when he when he goes to pick her up in that bar in Vietnam, it's such a great scene. And you have to imagine that was probably pretty fun to film. I mean, and to be in, because I feel like they had chemistry right off the bat, which is very important for this or any show, obviously. But I thought that they had chemistry, and I think that you could take them as a couple very seriously. And I love how they explained all that stuff. Talking about a paradox with Dr. Manhattan, and then again, there's textures and layers to all these characters. But going back for a second to Will, as we said, he gets the Minutemen, and he and Metropolis have a fling. I mean, it happens very early, and they're laying there together, and he says, "When did you know?" And he's like, "No, what? When did you know I was Hood of Justice?" And the entire conversation sounds like a gay thing. Like, when did you know? Be sure you wear your mask because the rest may not like. And he's not talking about, well, you're gay, you got to keep that to yourself. He's talking about you're black. So that entire scene, it's almost like the whole homosexual thing didn't really matter in the show too much. It wasn't really a topic, but the black thing was still a topic. And I'm like, God, that's all kinds of messed up. Like in our world, both of these things are still topics. They shouldn't be. It's ridiculous, but they are. And I don't know. It's definitely not our world that this show is set in. But there's tastes of it, right? There's colors of our world in this show for sure.
Yeah. And that scene when they're in bed is so interesting to me because it's almost like Captain Metropolis is telling him like, hey, make sure you keep your mask on, because it's like, nope. For you, the worst thing in the world is not that people might find out that you're gay. Mm-hmm. That's the worst thing for me. I don't want anybody to find out that I'm gay, because I'm supposed to be like the pinnacle of, what is, great in this world. Like, I'm a superhero. So nobody can find out I'm gay. Right. Nobody can find out that you're black, though, because that's worse for you.
Yeah, that's true. And I even said that he wasn't the best guy, but then we find out that Will, Gardner left his house to Will. So apparently they stayed close for years, even after Metropolis died, that the house that Will's living in is actually, Captain Metropolis's house, which is, I guess they just continue their relationship through all those years. But, like I said, man, is that the sense you got from that?
Yes and no. I kind of felt like he wasn't close to anybody but Will. That didn't mean that maybe they kept their relationship together. It just meant that they were together in this secret. And like it would just be so fitting that he felt like, no, I'm taking care of you.
Right. I get that.
And it's like, but you kind of not, because I asked you to be there for me and again, these are all relevant things. These are so relevant in today, in the sense that there's a lot of people in the world today that are kind of like, no, I'm here to be an ally to Black people. I'm here to help you. But when we go, hey, look, this is really a problem. You guys, that's your problem, though. But then it's later, look, I did so well for you. I helped you. I left you my house.
Right. Yeah, it's like, well, look how good I am. Look what good guy I am. I'm just going to give him my house just like that. You're like, yeah, you're missing the point. You're missing the point, moron. You're like, yeah, I get that. Honestly, I didn't even look at it from that perspective, but that makes total sense, especially for that character.
Yeah.
So, one guy that we got to talk about, and I don't know that I knew about any of his work until this show, was James Wolk, who played Joe Keene. And the first time you see Senator Keene, you're like, oh, God, he's perfect. He is a tall, good-looking, perfect haircut, perfect smile, great shape, looks good in a suit, Southern, smooth-talking senator in the United States. Oh, my God, he's totally going to be the villain. Like, you could just totally see it, I mean, if there, I said before, there's no real heroes or villains. I don't know. This guy's pretty much a villain. I don't think there's anything redeeming about this guy at all. You know what I mean? Not even anything remotely close to being heroic about this character in the slightest.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with him. I think he was in Mad Men, right? And I didn't really watch Mad Men like that.
I never got into that, no.
But I think he was in that. But yeah, he's really great in this show. His character is just all kinds of nuts.
Yes. Yes.
He's a totally whacked out guy. But again, he's subverting this idea of, who are the people we're supposed to be looking up to in this thing, and who's supposed to be out for our better interests is a senator. And then we find out he's doing all these things behind the scenes that are terrible. And I just think that just totally fits the message of what Watchmen was as a story. Because the whole point is, who is looking over these guys that are supposed to be our saviors. And so when you get the show, it's kind of like, well, who is looking over guys like senators and police officers and all these other people that are supposed to be, helping us?
Who watches the Watchmen?
Right.
Yeah. And we find out in the show, of course, if you read the book, if you're familiar with the book and you know the story, then you're familiar with the last name Keene. The character is the son of the guy that did the Keene Act, which basically banned being superheroes in this country, banned mass vigilantism. So the Keene Act is referenced a couple of different times in Watchmen. So the second he introduced himself, I'm like, okay, he's tied to someone. So it wasn't hard to figure out. But yeah, he's just smooth-talking snake oil salesman. That's what he is. And what's funny to me is that the whole 7th Cavalry thing, like the foot soldiers call it what it is. They're like, well, we want to extinguish, race and white man first and yeehaw and all that crap. And then when you get to the leaders of it, they don't express that at all. Like they've convinced themselves that no, we're not doing this. We're not like that. That's not what this is about. We've got other things in mind. Like it's a lie what they're saying, it's obvious what the group is there for. But yeah, just this notion of, I think it was Keene that said it, you know, putting the white man back where he's supposed to be and all this crap. And I'm like,
keep
wow.
America great.
Right. Exactly right. Exactly right. So, yeah, man, it's, wow. When he says that out loud, just the way Lori looks at it, I'm like, oh my God. Because the one-on-one with those two is freaking great. When, you know, they capture her and she's like, please, what are you going to do? Give me your speech about what you're going to do. You know, you're going to give me all this crap, save it. Like she doesn't even want anything to do with it. And he eventually tells her anyway. So another reason to love Jean Smart, kids, because she's freaking great in this show. The soundtrack, dude, once you hear the music, that one song has been in my head for like 5 days straight. And it's that deep, dark, ominous song. And it's got that refrain that just kind of bubbles up and then draws back. And it's, dude, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And I didn't know who did the soundtrack, but turns out it's Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross from Nine Inch Nails. And if you know anything about Trent Reznor, he's a freaking musical genius. This guy is great. This guy worked with Johnny Cash. I mean, he's... And apparently these two guys do a lot of soundtrack work, which I didn't even know that. But I'm going to know it now because I'm going to make a point to follow it. But man, another great component of this show is the soundtrack, 100%.
Well, if I remember correctly, wasn't the first trailer for the Watchmen movie, wasn't it a Nine Inch Nails song?
I think so. That sounds right.
Yeah, I think so. I could be misremembering, but that, again, that's such a smart thing to do, to tie this to the movie and make it a loose sequel kind of, but also make it almost, you know, more comic accurate than the movie happened to be.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And again, pitch perfect on the soundtrack for me, man. I mean, I just love this stuff. So yeah, we've bounced around like crazy because, man, in order to do a true deep dive on this show, you need a lot of time. You basically need a companion podcast, which they did. They did a companion podcast to the show, which I discovered after the first time I watched this show. But, you know, that's not the goal here. We just wanted to, you know, touch base on the important plot points here. Speaking of important plot points, what is your opinion on the overall master plan, which reveals itself by the last episode? I mean, how everything pieces together. Lady True's plan about, you know, taking Dr. Manhattan's power. Joe King gets involved. The 7th Cavalry's involved. All that stuff. I mean, in terms of how it's written, I mean, what's your take on that?
I just think it's interesting that the when we really boil down to what the main plot is, like you said, Lady True and Senator King are trying to take Dr. Manhattan's powers because they think we can solve everything once we have his powers. But at the same time, Dr. Manhattan himself is somewhere in Tulsa not using his powers because he understands that he has all his powers and it doesn't change anything.
Right.
It wouldn't matter if he could fix. It wouldn't matter if he could fix things instantly, or it wouldn't matter if he made small incremental changes. It would never be enough. And I think that is the whole overall plot of this movie, is that, I mean, this series is that, you know, absolute power does not help because it's lost in the hands of people, because you got True, Lady True's idea, whose idea of fixing the world is very weird and calculated. And then you have Senator King's, whose idea is probably, you know, mass genocide. So
yes,
it's just like absolute power does not belong in either one of their hands.
No, neither one of these cats are responsible enough or you know, capable enough to even handle something like this. John Osterman, who was a brilliant scientist, and in the book portrayed as a solid stand-up guy, smart, bright, intelligent, you know, true to form, good person. He can't handle it. There's too much to handle. It's too much for anyone to handle. Like, and I go back to the Superman thing. Like, just because you can do anything doesn't mean you can fix everything. I mean, you cannot force people to behave the way you want them to behave. You cannot do it. You can ask, you can be nice, you can bail them out, but you can't do it. I mean, it's impossible. They're going to do what they're going to do, regardless of who's in the world or who's not in the world. It doesn't make a difference. They're not going to stop. I mean, if they want to, snort cocaine, they're going to do it. They want to, go rob a liquor store, they're going to do that. It doesn't really matter. It's, and once you get that power and you realize, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. How long until you say, screw it, I'll just wipe them all out? Because that would be the next thing you'd do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why when we get the twist ending, it's kind of that same overall story. It's like, no, absolute power does not fix everything. Everybody throughout the last few episodes of this series is trying to get Dr. Manhattan's powers because they think it'll solve something, and it won't solve anything. No.
And speaking of, people are going to do what they're going to do, you can't control them. Manhattan actually creates people on Europa, and I find that bit fascinating as well. You see Vite plucking babies out of the water because it's like a breeding ground. It's like the primordial ooze where these embryos are kind of being, I don't want to say hatched, but they're just created. And he's just picking them out and throwing them back in. If he doesn't like what he sees, I'm like, okay, this is starting to feel really kind of messed up. Like, and I don't know if there's a commentary behind that scene or not. I don't know, but it kind of feels like nothing in this show is done by accident. Everything's done by design. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of commentary behind that, but leave it to Adrian Veidt to hatch this plan to get himself off Europa, where he thought he wanted to be, but he ended up going mad. And then, everything's tied back to his daughter. And it's, man, when everything pieces itself together by episode 9, it's insane. I mean, just in terms of the plot, I thought it was incredibly well written. And it's interesting, it's intriguing. But man, the way it all ties together, it's a very satisfying end, I think, to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we could have like an entire 2-hour conversation about what is going on with Veidt on Europa and like what is the undertone of him finally finding, what is paradise for him, and he ends up, being a complete loon at this place and being like a murderer there.
Right. Yeah, he what he thought he wanted, it turns out he didn't want. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, he's surrounded by all these, I don't want to say clones. They're not really clones, I guess, but they're, the disregard for life in this show. Like, he doesn't care that he's killed all of these people, because he ends up using their bodies to spell out the word "Save me, daughter," so her satellite will see it and come pick him up, which is a part of his master plan. So, again, disregard for life. Even the scene where, Looking Glass goes to visit his ex and they're cloning dogs, and she's like, "What do you think about these two?" And he says, that one's a bit small, or it's not the right size. And she destroys it right there. And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of that going on in this show where it's like, kill him, kill her, whatever, kill it, doesn't matter. I kind of got that sense in a few different scenes in the show.
Yeah, but that is essentially a lot of what Watchmen was built around, this idea of nihilism and this idea of cynicism, where it's like, well, it doesn't matter what you do, your fellow man will do what he wants to do. And it's like, at the end of the day, we're all going to die. It's kind of like that same idea in this show.
Yeah, tick-tock. The clock's always ticking. That's what the Watchmen book was based on. Like, the Doomsday Clock in Watchmen, right? But now it's the Millennium Clock in this show. And again, it's that same theme of we're counting down to something big. And when it happens, it's not going to be pretty. So, yeah, like the world's just doomed. It's just doomed. And, God, I hope it's not doomed. I like living here and stuff. So, all my stuff's here. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm like, what am I going to do if we end up somewhere else? I don't know. But, yeah, And you know, a lot of that's from Alan Moore, obviously. So the fact that he's took his name off of this is one of the most compelling parts of this whole story, not just the show, but the whole Watchmen story. Like, he is so far removed from this. And I recently, I was listening to a podcast or hearing someone talk, I forget what it was, about how, man, he really hates this and he hates that. My God, all this other stuff, like kind of bagging on him for it. And I'm like, they're not your characters that he took, that these people took and changed. They're not your stuff. So, you know, you spend your time and energy and your days and nights and getting no sleep and putting all of your creative energy into basically creating an entire universe full of characters, and then being told, yeah, we're going to take this and make a movie out of it. You're like, what? I don't want that. So, yeah, I kind of always have had Alan Moore's side through this whole thing. I can understand why people are irritated about it, but at the end of the day, I don't care who he was writing for when he created it. These are still his creations.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this idea that when you create something and you put it out into the world, then other people decide what they want it to be. And you already created it, what your intent for it is. And I think his intent for it was always like, this is my deconstruction of comic books. And it's not meant to be a kind of a realistic view of what the world is. I don't think that he sees the world in that way. I don't think he's that cynical, but I think that he sees comic books in that way, and I think that's the way he deconstructed them for this project. But at the same time, it was meant to be this standalone project. It's not supposed to be this holy text that people kind of treat it as. And so that's why I understand why he's like, no, it's not meant to be, gone back to, because nope, this is sort of like my magnum opus, my kind of essay on what I believe comics are and what is a problem with them. And so when you kind of revisit it, it's like, well, no, you're doing exactly what I told you is the problem with comics. You're trying to make this a serial thing, and it's not. Right. And so I've always understood why he felt that way. And I've always understood why he's like, nope, there's nothing else to do. There's no other story to tell, because it's not a story. I've already told you that Watchmen is what it is. There's nothing to do afterwards. There's no sequel. So I've always understood him in that way. But again, when you put your art out into the world and people enjoy it, and they want it to be something other than what you intended to be, because people interpret things different, because that's what art is. It's meant to be interpreted. And so I get it. I get people love these characters, and people want to see more from certain things with these characters, and they want to see more stories. But I also understand Alan Moore's point of view.
I do, completely. And it's sort of the opposite of what's happened with the George Lucas thing with the Star Wars universe. Because had he just done the 3 movies and left well enough alone and didn't go do the other trilogy, which in my opinion is hot garbage. I never got into the second trilogy. I just couldn't get into it. It's got its fans. It's got a generation of fans that grew up on it as their Star Wars movies, which baffles me.
But you're talking about the prequels?
Yes. Dude, I can't get into those films to say. There's some, I mean, there's I don't know, decent parts. There's, good effort, I guess. But man, as a whole, those movies, to me, just fell flat. They can't hold a candle to the original trilogy, man,
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy them for what they are. I wouldn't say that they're good. At best, I would say Revenge of the Sith is probably one of my favorite Star Wars movies, but that's because there's a lot of things about it that I enjoy other than it being an overall good story, if that makes sense. Like, right. There's so many things that I quote from it all the time. Of course, only a Sith deals in absolutes. I'll do what I must. I quote that constantly. So there's tons of things that I take from that movie, and that's why I enjoy it so much. But I wouldn't say that it's up there with some of the other ones.
And again, that I can't help but compare the two universes, because had Lucas just made the original trilogy and left it alone, I don't know if we would have this backlash that we've had, because now you have the Disney trilogy and it's become this whole other thing, this whole other monster. And you've got legions of fans who are, mad for the wrong reasons. They don't like Finn. grow up, get over yourself. They don't like a female lead with Ray, grow up, get over yourself. But for the fans who were mad because the plots fell apart, the characterizations didn't feel right, I can understand those arguments. And I can relate to that, where I'm like, wait a minute, why would she do that when you know she would never do that? I mean, it's that kind of stuff is infuriating. But again, like to your point about the Watchmen universe, it wasn't meant to be a universe. It was just supposed to be one book. But the Star Wars universe is meant to be this thing, and people have taken it to heart and grew up with it, and it's become part of their childhood, part of who they are. It's part of their character. Star Wars is part of who I am, for sure. It just as much as pro wrestling or comic books or anything else is. So I can understand the divide, but man, it's the toxic fan base who want it to be one thing, and that's either not what it is, or the creators have lost touch, I guess. But for the Watchmen, like you said, it was one guy saying, look, I wrote a book. That's what I did. Leave it alone. But man, DC's got to make that money, right? They keep this thing going. Did you bother to look at any of DC's Watchmen series? Did they call it the Doomsday Clock? Is that what it was called? When they brought the characters into the mainstream DC universe?
I didn't. I didn't read any of that stuff. It just felt wrong to me. I did read some of the Before the Watchmen stuff. Like I read the Minutemen series. That was decent. I read the Rorschach one, I think.
Right.
But even that stuff, it just felt like, no, you guys are trying to glean stuff out of, this guy's text, and he's telling you like, nope, this is my work, and I don't want you guys to do this.
And like I said, man, DC's got to make that money. I mean, supposedly Alan Moore wanted to use the old Charlton heroes, but they couldn't get the rights to them, I guess. So he just created his own universe, which,
I mean, you could see them all there. Like, I mean, because Rorschach is supposed to be
supposed to be the Question.
Correct. He's supposed to be the Question.
Yeah.
And I mean, all the other ones are kind of obvious when you really put them next to each other. But yeah, I mean, we have a whole conversation about, doing something with your, artistic integrity in mind, and you doing it under a corporate umbrella. So there's no artistic integrity when it comes to corporate. They just want to take something and they want to use it to make money.
Yeah,
that's what they exist for.
Yeah, they're gonna put their logo on it, and they're gonna make it into what they want it to be, and they just want you to fall in line. And I don't know. To me, part of the argument is, I guess I can understand where fans get upset, because I would say, look, you put your name on the contract, you took their money, they told you what they wanted, you made it happen. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't that easy. Maybe there's a lot more going on there that I'm privy to. But again, like you said, I can kind of see both sides. There's a lot that we haven't touched on because, we didn't want to do this episode for like 4 hours or anything. So there's a lot of stuff we haven't covered. Maybe we'll revisit this topic again one of these days. A couple of key takeaways from this show is the first one, and then we'll end on the second one. The first one is Damon Lindelof had made no advances toward a second season. Just like Alan Moore, he said, I've told my story. This story's over. There's nothing more that needs to be said. And if there was a story, maybe I would think about it, but so far I've seen nothing to make me believe we should fire this thing back up again. I mean, in your opinion, do you leave this alone now, or do you go back to the well for a third time?
I mean, of course, it was really good. Part of me would like to see the show come back, but I also think there's something really good about, telling your story, ending up on top, and saying that's it. Like, I don't need to come back, and I don't need to give you diminished returns.
Yeah, well said. That makes total sense. Yeah, just leave it alone. Let it be what it is, and don't mess with it. Kind of like, again, kind of like Alan Moore said to begin with. Just leave this alone and don't try to make it into something else, because it's not there. Going back to the well for a third time at this point, right? I mean, you would just be going back for the sake of HBO making some more money. And I applaud the fact that he's not into that he's just wanting to leave it where it's at. Because, yes.
I just once you said that with the HBO thing, it is really, really interesting to me. We've talked before on the show about Zack Snyder and the Snyder Cut.
Yes.
And I did think it was very fascinating that the Snyder Cut got greenlit once they realized that Watchmen wasn't coming back. And
Ah.
the the cynic in me kind of believes that Warner Brothers greenlit the Snyder Cut as a miniseries because they weren't going to be able to fill that spot with Watchmen episodes.
Interesting. That's some conspiracy theories going on, but I dig it. I think that makes perfect sense.
That's my hot take because there's all this. Well, the Snyder Cut always exists, and I'm like, I don't know if you got to pour millions of dollars into something, you got to recast people, and you got to bring in the old cast to reshoot. It's not really a director's cut anymore.
No, not at all. Like they're calling it that, but whatever. But supposedly that thing may fire back up now itself. Like we didn't think we'd ever see a Justice League Part 2, and God, who knows now what could happen. But yeah, that's interesting. It's also interesting that the Watchmen series is going to be followed up by the superhero team that Alan Moore was kind of just deconstructing to begin with, the whole concept of it, It's like, now that you've watched this super intense, highly controversial at times, and often crazy at times, show that deconstructs the superhero genre, let's now watch superheroes. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting also just thinking of the ideology behind it and thinking, here's somebody that took the Watchmen property and made something a lot more smart and subversive. And we're just going to go back to the guy that wanted to do a covers version.
Right. And I was thinking about this today. I think it was today, maybe yesterday. At this point in 2020, a lot of the comic book entertainment that's out there is deconstructing the heroes. It seems to be the latest thing. I mean, The Boys is a hit. I enjoyed the book. The show's pretty good. But it's all about deconstructing the superhero mythos and like tearing down what you watch on the Marvel stuff. It's like, well, here it is in the real world. And I started thinking, man, was Alan Moore the first guy to do that in the comics?
I'm not sure if he was the first one, but I absolutely believe that Alan Moore changed everything. I think just everything he did with books like this and The Killing Joke, because he wrote that too, right?
Yes, he did actually. Great book.
Yeah, The Killing Joke and some of his other work and just some of the stuff that Frank Miller that was doing in the same vein around the same time. It changed everything. It changed the way an entire generation viewed comic books.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And I like you, I don't know if I can swear that he was the first guy. Marvel has Squadron Supreme, which deconstructed the Justice League big time and wasn't really in the Marvel universe. It took a different approach and said, here's the Justice League in the real world and here's how they fall apart. And now the bad part is if you were to try to do the Squadron Supreme now, the first thing people say is, oh, you're ripping off the Boys. You're ripping off Watchmen. I'm like, no, this was in the 80s, man. This was long before the Boys. And I don't know if it was before or after Watchmen. I'm guessing it's after because it seems like that would make sense, but I don't know that for sure. But yeah, just that idea of, okay, let's go watch the big budget and it's a Marvel film. Let's go home and watch the show that just says, well, all that's crap. So it's an interesting, and you know what? Fans are cool with both. Like we don't turn our nose up and, this isn't superheroes. Doesn't matter. It's about, is it a good story? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think you got to treat fans like they're smart. And I think that's one of those things. We're both wrestling fans where wrestling is kind of coming around to that era too, where you gotta treat fans like they're smart. And there's a room for us to still watch the product and still enjoy something like Dark Side of the Ring and understand like there's maybe some, seedy things going on behind something that we think is interesting or entertaining, but we can still enjoy it for what it is.
Right. Yeah. We're able to differentiate the two and make sense of it. Because like you said, we are smart. And I think that's a good bit of advice for any creator out there is like, don't underestimate your audience, right? Because they're capable of a lot more than maybe you think they are. So the last takeaway from this show for me, and it's a scene that's been talked about a whole bunch, like a lot of scenes in this show have been talked about over the past year, is the very last scene. Did Dr. Manhattan, formerly Angela's husband, Cal, right? Did he give her his abilities, yes or no? What do you think?
I'm going to assume yes. And the reason I'm going to assume yes is because it fits with everything that was going on this season. It's to give everyone a choice. And of course he would, if he's no longer living, if whoever's going to take on this mantle, not like that Dr. Manhattan should be a mantle. It shouldn't be passed on to anyone. But of course, human beings would think that it's a mantle that should be passed on because human beings would think that he has to exist. Right. And so I honestly believe that, yeah, I think she did take on his abilities. And I think that's part of the reason why you don't need to revisit the show, because you'd just have her relearning the same lessons that he had already learned.
Oh, very true. Yeah. The show would be centered on her instead of him. And it would be, she'd be trying to struggle with, okay, I'm here right now, but I'm also 5 years from now. Like, how is this possible? Yeah, you're right. And see, I fall on the side of that he didn't, because we never see her foot touch the water. And Damon Lindelof supposedly wanted it that way because he's like, I want to leave people guessing. This is how the show ends. There's no season 2. We're not going to tell you. It's up to your imagination. But I could totally envision her just falling in and then getting up and like getting the water out of her eyes, just going, God, okay, fine, you got me. Just knowing that he would have said those things to her, but then not wanting to burden her with this, because in the end, did he really believe who he was and what he could do made a difference, or did he think it was a burden to him? Like, maybe that's the question.
Well, yeah, but I think there's also this question of him understanding it's a burden and telling a human being that doesn't experience his struggle, like, this is a burden for me. Nobody would ever want this. But of course, because we're humans, I want to try it because I can do it. You're saying you can't do it, but what if I can? And that's always been the struggle with Dr. Manhattan. I mean, that's the crux of the entire show. It's like, well, he doesn't want to use his powers to change everything, but Lady True is like, but maybe I can. Or the same thing with Senator King. Well, but maybe I can. Maybe I have the answer.
Right.
And I think that just represents kind of like the endless struggle of, to be human and make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I think that's kind of the idea of maybe if she does get his powers, because, and again, that's why you don't want to revisit the show, because that's kind of the point. It's like, well, she would just be revisiting his own struggles again, and it just would be ongoing.
Yeah, very true. It would just become monotonous, and I don't know. I think we've seen what we needed to see of this universe. I mean, I'm perfectly happy without a season 2. I'm perfectly fine without it. And it's different in this day and age to just walk away. Just say, I'm done. It's over. We had fun. It was fun. Did everybody have fun? All right, we're out. We're gone. So, yeah, I'm cool with that. I don't think you need to do any more at all. I mean, we could both be wrong, and they announce tomorrow they're going to move forward in 2021. I don't know. But yeah, I hope they don't. I don't know how. And plus, how do you top this? How do you top the complexity of this show? I don't know, by trying to be more complex? I don't know if you can do that. That seems like a tall order.
Yeah, no, I think the worst thing they could try to do is try to push for a season 2 without Lindelof. That would be a huge mistake, in my opinion.
I agree totally, and I don't think he's on board. He doesn't seem to be. So, as we said, man, we could have gone on for hours about this show. Still a lot more stuff we could talk about, but I think we hopefully got the big stuff out of the way and covered the bare essentials of it. So, we've come to that part again. So, if you can, give me your last word on Watchmen.
It's about as complex as it is in real life, with like the real life behind the scene politics with it, as it is when you watch it. It's a paradox in itself, just the creation of it, and there's a lot of paradoxes in just the viewing experience of it.
Absolutely. And for me, I think this show does what any great creation from any creator can do, and that's it gets people talking. And that's important for any creator, whether you're a writer or you're an artist or you're a musician or you make TVs or make movies or TV show or whatever it is you're into. I mean, if people are talking and people are, consuming it and taking it to heart or giving you their opinion on it, that means that you're affecting people. And I think at the end of the day, that's what matters here is that, yes, the social commentary is huge in this show, but there's reason for that because we live in chaotic times and it's a messed up world. It's a messed up country. And maybe one of these days we'll get it back where it needs to be so we don't end up looking like the Watchmen universe because, brother, that would suck. So that, here's hoping. Fingers crossed, kids. Always forward, always. And that is Watchmen. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.